The conversion of the Ethiopian treasure, and beginning at verse 29 of the 8th chapter of Acts. Then the Spirit said to Philip, "Go near and overtake this chariot." So Philip ran to him and heard him reading the prophet Isaiah, and said, "Do you understand what you're reading?" And he said, "How can I unless someone guides me?" And he asked Philip to come up and sit with him. The place in the scripture which he was reading was this: "He was led as a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth." This is taken from Isaiah, the 53rd chapter, verses 7 and 8, is where the Ethiopian treasure was reading from. And we find that the next thing we learn is that in verse 35 says that Philip opened his mouth and beginning at this scripture preached Jesus to him. Now we need to understand that Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 53 is referring to Jesus. There are some people in the world today, some of our Jewish friends, who would interpret Isaiah 53 as having something to do with the nation of Israel, that this was what was being referred to there. But very clearly, when Philip, an inspired preacher on this particular occasion, whenever he said that he preached Jesus to him, beginning from that same scripture, it is clearly inferred that this passage is not talking about the Jewish nation, but rather to the Messiah, who would come some 700 years after the prophecy was made. And as we partake of the Lord's Supper this morning, we remember the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. We look back to Calvary, and we look forward to the time that he's coming again. We partake of the bread, it represents his body, the fruit of the vine, which represents his blood. And in so doing, we need to do it, as Paul said, in a way that would be pleasing unto him, and that we might rightly discern the Lord's death until he comes again.
Number 155.